Assalamu alaikum. This change in schedule has made my job infinitely harder to follow a true sporting legend in Pakistan. Thank you again for inspiring us, Sana. Thank you. And I, for the life of me, I have not been able to figure out who was the third poster of. So I could recognize Wasim Akram and Saeed Anwar. I don't know who was the third person they were holding. All right. President Rasul, Provost Carl Emmerheim, and Dean of Students and Congress Chair Dr. Ashamia. Dear students, faculty, and friends, thank you for this amazing honor. Let me start by clarifying about my seemingly very airbrushed picture on this conference promotion material. So the explanation lies in a very special calendar, which is reserved for university presidents only, right? While most of humanity measures the passing of time in Anno Domini, or AD, or after Hijrah, AH, and so on, university presidents should be looked at by the exclusive calendar known as TM, short for Trustees Meeting. So this picture was taken a full 3 TM ago. And 1 TM is roughly equivalent to about 4 human years. So you do the math. And when that picture was taken, I actually did not need the reading glasses, which I do now. So we're past that. And everybody stole my yellow T-shirt idea, so thank you for that. I wanted to say a thing or two about that, too. This is by far the best shade of yellow I've seen on a T-shirt. So as a small favor to your keynote speaker, please allow me to know the source of these T-shirts for my own university. Add to the trustees meeting years, I, unlike Sana, who's a world-class athlete, I too took a 20-hour journey to join this conference. I arrived in Karachi just yesterday. And I have a witness from Aga Khan University, Babar Hassan. He was on the flight from Dubai to here. So so adding to this jet lag out of Houston, so please forgive me if I'm a little incoherent. Nevertheless, 1 second. So the topic that I have chosen, or I was given, I've added this line to that, the invisible obvious, right? So student-centeredness in university design, what should be obvious? Obviously, it is an important enough conversation to be had, and my congratulations to this Congress for pointing to it. Especially at this crucial juncture in the history of higher education in our country. As the provost identified, you see that small bump somewhere near 1982-83. This was a landmark moment in Pakistan's growth of higher education. Aga Khan University, Pakistan's first and one of the world's very few private universities outside of the US, was chartered. Aga Khan's historical contribution to Pakistan's higher education landscape continues to be a source of inspiration. As you see, humbly, near 2014, another private university, apart from many others, has sprung up. So let me, for the first time, publicly and formally, as the founding president of Habib University, acknowledge and express my gratitude to Aga Khan University. Thank you, Aga Khan, for paving the way. The theme of today, as I said, that the invisible obvious. This reminds me of a small fable that was quoted by late David Foster Wallace, the fish story. So there is this two young fish swimming by, and they encounter an older fish coming from the other direction. And the older fish says, "How are you guys? How's the water?" And they continue to swim in the opposite direction. A few moments later, one of the young fish looks at the other one and says, "What the hell is water?" Right? So the point of this fish story is that the most obvious and important realities are often the hardest to see and talk about. So my congratulations again that as the first student congress, you have picked on something which is neither obvious as it ought to be or a clear focus in the university, which is the student-centeredness. In the coming 20 minutes, I'll expand on these two fundamental terms of university planning and student-centeredness or university design, and we'll attempt to converge them. Let's see how it goes. Starting with the term university design. So I've taken the liberty of expanding it in basically three fundamental features. So using another meaning of the word design, what is the intent? That means what's the mission of a university? And that's somewhat important. I will see in a second. And then, of course, the overall plan of the university and its physical design. And then how it converges with the idea of student-centeredness. So when we were planning for Habib University back in 2009, 10, 11, we were trying to figure out if there are any common elements, common stories to all the world's great universities. They all have very different features and different stories, different characters. But there was one good thing that we did stumble on, and there was a great study. It was done in 2007, which essentially did what we were trying to do, to locate the common features of all great universities. And eventually it boiled down to one thing. And that one thing was that all great universities eventually have one thing in common, which is a great sense of mission. Right? So apart from all the other obvious things, their faculty and their facilities and research profile and so on, but this was one fundamental root that all great universities seem to be emanating from. Let me give you two examples, which is a couple of miles apart on in Cambridge, Massachusetts. On the left is Harvard, famous mission statement, succinct, veritas, which means truth. And one of my favorite mission statements, or mission signal, which Mans at Manas at MIT, mind and hands, two of the most creative endowments of human species brought together. So as a result of Veritas, Harvard started off with a pretty sort of like a Puritan madrasa. So Veritas in 1636 meant to them truth for Christ and the church. But they did not give up on that idea of seeking the truth. Especially took root in somewhere in the late 19th century when they had the longest tenure of a president in Harvard's history, Charles William Eliot, when he took over. So he essentially traveled to Europe, met with his well-known cousin, T.S. Eliot, who directed him to Berlin University, which is now known as Humboldt University, and essentially changed the way Harvard was and converted it into one of the world's great research universities, and always aiming at that particular mission, Veritas. Now, so this truth keeps changing with new discoveries and realities, but the mission continues to guide it. And the same with MIT. So it's mens and manas, mind and hand. It's essentially reflects the educational ideals of MIT founders who were promoting above all education for practical application. So in spite of what we hear from Sheldon in Big Bang Theory and how he rails on Howard, who was an MIT graduate, MIT is a decent school, and Adil Najam is a living proof of that, right? So But that particular mission, the fundamental nature of the university, essentially is rooted in this sort of innovation and practical discovery, doing things with your hands and so on. Such is the power of the first feature of this design, which is the mission. So this pursuit of sort of overall designs and mission, which are sort of fairly generic, over the centuries has been a balancing act between few fundamental reputation drivers in a university: faculty, students, and their success and resource and campus, etc. However, in the past 7 decades, a rapid divergence of these interests has emerged, right? These are some interesting headlines. This is about the same university, right? It does, in fact, suck, right? There's some schadenfreude to be gained from that. Here you go. Another legendary school, Wharton. Caltech, right? This is obviously something serious going on, right? So one can, even if we want to, we can't just trivialize all of these cries for help, essentially, and pointing to this, this rapidly growing divergence of interest of students and faculty in these grand research enterprises, right? So let's blame all of this to Einstein, right? As he's credited with many great things. I'm just stretching it a bit, but nevertheless, this was actually a watershed moment, and it has been used as a reference point in the folklore of American higher education. So Einstein was hired by Princeton in a famous coup, which they plotted against Harvard, as a matter of fact, without an intention of him ever seeing the inside of a classroom. Right? So this was that particular moment, which essentially somewhat codifies, symbolizes this particular divergence, that what is the university for? Is it to just attract these grand superstars, or does it have a contract with students to fulfill? And then, right, all of this, more morbid, right? Again, I think Dr. Najam will bail me out on that, but there's a famous saying at MIT that if you win the best teaching award, that's a kiss of death. You're done. You'll never get a tenure. That's quite remarkable, right? All of this is sort of a structural divergence that has been sort of settling in the foundations of the world great centers of learning, which is taking the purpose of university further and further away from student-centeredness, right? And I use the term structural. So accreditation, faculty appraisals, monies, grants, all of those have been gradually built around, so much so that 70% of Caltech's operating budget is research. Not a word term student added is not part of that. This obviously, so these universities continue to operate at a level based on one assumption alone, that all the best students in their respective constituencies will continue to apply to come to these institutions. They'll go to MIT, they'll go to a Caltech, they go to a Harvard, they'll apply to a Princeton, and so on, right? So that's how this divergence has been somewhat kept in check. This obviously is not an emulatable model for a place like Pakistan, right? To start with, 90% of Pakistani students don't even apply to any university, right? Leave alone the best universities. It's safe to say that about 90% of the best potential is foreclosed before the start of university applications. And more importantly, we don't have a multi-billion-dollar research infrastructure, primarily driven by the state or the government. And almost definitely, there are a finite number of Nobel laureates that one can pass around in the universities, right? So this model has become more and more impractical and more and more unemulatable, and in my contention, completely unnecessary. So the universities are not oblivious to this divergence, because students are smart, right? So there have been adjustments. So there are in UMich and all the UCs and University of Texas and everywhere, you'll see that teaching and learning centers are coming up. There is adjusting the weightage of faculty appraisal. This grand old and now ubiquitous concept called the undergraduate research, which is coming. But I think they're all framing the problem in a fundamentally incomplete way. These are all good developments, but that's not all. So again, let me congratulate the term picked for this particular Congress, student-centeredness. Student-centeredness should simply mean seeing students as a primary intellectual asset of the university, apart from the faculty. That's what true student-centeredness means. And this intellectual partnership between students and faculty eventually should drive the scholarly agenda of a university. Let me give you a different story. This is an institution that came into being in 2003. It's about 7 kilometers outside of Boston, near Wellesley College. This is Olin College of Engineering. Right? It prepares students. There's a mission that is rare, which puts students right at the heart of its fundamental purpose. There's another one, which is about 7, 8, 10 kilometers from Caltech, known as Harvey Mudd College, which is part of the Claremont Consortium. Again, a grand old beautiful undergraduate engineering-centered school. Now, you would be shocked to know, this is not the headline that I wanted, but nevertheless, Olin and Harvey Mudd are ranked higher than MIT and Caltech in engineering education. This is miraculous. An institution that is just 15 years old, right in the neighborhood of MIT, is giving MIT a run for its money to get the top students. That's the Olin College. Because both of these institutions saw what I have just described. So they were, by the accident of geography, were right in the neighborhoods of two of the biggest names in engineering and science, MIT and Caltech. So they changed the game. They didn't have a chance in hell to play the same game that MIT and Caltech were playing. So they shifted it from research to students. These institutions are about students and student-centered. Not that they don't do research. Their faculty does first-class research with undergraduate students. Not that they have in any way compromised the quality of who they get as faculty. But the fact is that their primary contract and the primary view of students is that they are the real intellectual, or at least equally precious intellectual asset for the university, right? But there is a catch in that. There's a reason that I have only been able to quote 2 STEM institutions, right? Both of them are engineering-centered, who are able to do it. And that's where it gets particularly complex. So you see in graduate programs all over the world, they are somewhat student-centered, right? So you figure out your own dissertation, you have an advisor who sort of helps you, holds hands with you. It's essentially driven by you. But the nature of humanities and social science graduate program is fundamentally different than doing graduate program in STEM, because the PhD ethic of engineering and science is collaborative, right? So you work in lab, you sometimes co-write, sometimes co-publish, don't even write a dissertation in many pure science PhDs, and you can actually do some publications, even co-publications, and you get through. But humanities and social science is a singularly individual pursuit. You're isolated and you look for some special, nuanced idea, and might I say, somewhat narcissistic, right? So then you actually develop a niche. And you develop a niche, and then you push the university to become your niche-centered, not necessarily student-centered. I have done a PhD in some form of medieval literature. It will be good for my university to do the medieval literature, right? That's the niche. So that keeps the problem continuously open and somewhat complex. So armed with all of this insight, we set course somewhere in 2013-14. First, we wanted to get the design right. And we wanted to essentially root it to what we can understand it well. So this is our mission statement. This is our mans et manas or veritas. This is a saying of Imam Ali, which says, "Qimatu kulli imri ma yuhsinahu." Everyone's worth, not just faculty, not just students, not just staff, everyone, kulli imri, is in your yuhsan. And yuhsan is a complex verb of Arabic. It emanates from husn, hasan, ihsan, muhsin, ahsan, which means excellence, passion, beauty, service, sacrifice. That if you were to grow yourself, if you were to actually realize your true worth as a human being, which is qimat, this is the requirement, right? So one of our faculty members came up with a very succinct translation. Essentially, it is thoughtful self-cultivation, right? Self-cultivation, invitation for everyone's self-cultivation, and how university ensures the agency for it. So it, from a mission, becomes an egalitarian, intellectually egalitarian possibility is created. Again, let me emphasize, this conversation is not about teaching versus research. This is about placing student at the heart of the mission of a university, right? These are some views from Habib University, by the way. So when we set that particular mission, we thought, what would it need for us to accomplish, to have a university at the other end of it? So essentially, we listed down about 5,000 things on an Excel sheet and then condensed it to these 7, right? That if we can get, while keeping the value of Yosan and keeping the value of student-centeredness in mind, we can get these right, we can make this particular start. And all of them from the context of this student-centeredness, right? So for instance, in our curriculum research, teaching, learning, we looked at, for the first time, that how a course can be codified as a deeply intellectual and dynamic product. Not just a published paper, but a course itself. So we are dabbling, let's say, with the idea of, we call it CPAC, not the CPAC. Today is a bad day for it. CPAC, with an A, which is content, pedagogy, assessment, and community, right? In many of these, students can participate. Let's say, and there are flexibilities. Let's say faculty is rigid about content, but pedagogy and assessment and the community a course will generate. Almost all courses at Habib would require some form of engagement outside of your discipline and outside of your even university boundaries. Then we essentially defined a shared experience at Habib University not in terms of courses, but in forms of thought, which essentially are grounding, right? So the 7 forms of thought and action that everybody at Habib needs to take at least 11 courses in are historical and social thought, philosophical thought, language and expression, creative practice, formal reasoning, quantitative reasoning, and scientific method and technology, right? So these forms of thought essentially allow us to forge further communities and overcome further boundaries between the intellectual communities who exist at Habib University. Faculty. That's a tough one, right? So unlike Olin or Harvey Mudd, we did not have the luxury to lay out this mission with this clarity and will automatically attract a large number of high-quality faculty who would be attracted to this. So we have recruited all PhDs or terminal degrees from world-class institutions, but this is a question of crafting an alliance with them, ensuring that they remain inspirers and leaders of the university and enterprise, and not see student-centeredness in any way or form as the dilution of their significance. But it does require some form of sacrifice from them, from the conventional academic career. And it requires a lot of work to be put on sophisticated onboarding, orientation, and ongoing engagement framework, which we continue to aspire to improve. In no way we have gotten it right. This is, again, I want to emphasize, it's not a teaching versus research debate. All student-centeredness will require great teaching, but all great teaching is not necessarily student-centered. The next is networking and partnership. Now that's where this sort of connects to the faculty thing. That in this world of Einstein-inspired divergence of faculty and student interest, it became of critical strategic significance that who do we form alliances with. So the reason I've been freely quoting Olin and Harvey Mudd, they are extensive partners of Habib University. And so is Stanford University School of Design, which again has sort of come into being as a result of redefining pedagogy at Habib. So this is very, very influential. So a number of faculty would like to see any kind of proof of concept, that whatever we are trying to say, does it exist? So this partnership and alliance becomes crucial for them to be able to see various examples of this. The next is resource mobilization. So I have collapsed to resource mobilization and students, right? So this goes hand in hand. Again, the point that I was making, in Pakistan, there is an absolute shocking structural bottleneck that has emerged about students in the past 20 years or so, 30 years. So in Pakistan, as many of you would know, there are two fundamental streams of high school. One is known as local education boards, and the other is known as international education boards. About 90% plus of our high school graduation takes place out of local education boards. Less than 10% come out of international, which is your O-level, A-level, little sliver of IB and so on. But when it comes to admission in the top 10, 15 universities in this country, this equation is exactly flipped. So those 90% are reduced to less than 5 or 6%. And that 10% balloons to about 92, 93%. Right? Now this stems from another complex problem, that Pakistani private universities, or perhaps anywhere in the world as well, they have not figured out the right sustainability formula. So one key drivers for this particular unevenness is simple, that most private universities will depend on students who can pay the fee. And where will you find fee-paying students? In the O-level, A-level stream. So what you do is you create completely pseudo-academic arguments and there are a number of barriers which are erected. I'm not saying it's done out of cynical intent. This is something that has sort of grew somewhat organically. So the sustainability question in Pakistan, that nowhere in the world great private universities depend on student tuition. There's one thing very odd, by the way, not a lot of people may have known this, that private universities did not exist anywhere in the world until 45, 50 years ago, except for one place, which is the US. And this is for a very peculiar historical reason, that in the US, universities started to come up before the country existed. So there was no state for the university that could have governed those universities. So Harvard 1636, Yale 1701, Princeton I think 1711, and America 1776. So this bizarre historical moment created a unique design of a university in the world's most cutthroat capitalist country and society, there are institutions of excellence which are designed to lose money, private universities, because they are owned by the society. So only Stanford University has a community of about 90,000 donors, and only 24% of them are Stanford alumni. So that has shaped philanthropy in America completely differently as compared to the rest of the world, right? So if I go to, let's say, Sweden and want to raise money for a university, they would look at me as if I'm from Neptune, because government pays for the university. But it's commonplace in America. But in Pakistan, for whatever reason, starting with Aga Khan's inspiration, and we started with a number of private universities, we have not figured that out. So we have contributed to this structural anomaly where most of our, I shouldn't say most, overwhelming majority of our high school students are foreclosed the possibility of even getting into a university. So that requires a different kind of resource generation and mobilizing our society to support the participation of students who hitherto did not have any possibility to get into a university. To that end, Habib University, statistically speaking, is the most generous private university in the world. We have 78% tuition discount, close to 80%. That means that every 100 rupee that we are supposed to recover in tuition, we're recovering only 21 rupees. And it is made possible, A, because of the Habib grant, and because of the donor community that we continue to take this particular message to. So this is very, very crucial, and this sort of connects with students. The next is physical design. Crucial. It will be oddly self-serving for me to pontificate about how beautiful is Habib campus, which it is, by the way, right? So the idea was to create an environment, not a building, right? Non-generic spaces, and with fierce commitment to building this community and allowing for faculty and students to interact all the time and to interact with each other and even have some solitude corners. Another space, right? So we have what we call playground, which is the Center for Innovative Transdisciplinary Design, which is essentially we have created with the support of Stanford D School, the most intellectually egalitarian space that we have, right? Where students and faculty essentially wrestle with the problem on equal footing and figure out various solutions, which are all credited and acknowledged courses. And finally, governance and institutional, right? Because we laid out that particular intent and mission, because this is what we shared with our trustees, we have forced them to govern us on different indicators. And almost all of those indicators has the word students in it, right? And that has allowed us to allocate resources for students way up front. So it's a beautiful place, Aga Khan, but I just heard this is the first student congress after 35 years. The first person that we recruited was the Dean of Student Life, right? That's how we started. That's how fiercely committed we are to the concept of student-centeredness. These are some of the aspirations, right? That how student-centeredness will allow you, and this actually, I'm glad with Sana Amir's presentation, there's a certain overlap, that if students are working in a community of themselves or with their faculty and so on, that's how they will learn to navigate the complexity. If their community themselves is diverse, as we have allowed for about 40% of our students have come from local examination board, that allows for that complexity to be even deepened. And I hate this term of real life versus university. Why can't university itself be essentially a part of real life, right? If the courses and if the intellectual engagement is continuously with real life, then it is real life. Then there is no grand orientation required once you come out. And of course, a continuous space for innovation. These questions remain open, however. These are many decades old, right? So smartest faculty, the most inspired minds for foreseeable future will continue to want to not teach, not want to be student-centered, right? That's the question. STEM versus humanities, I've already touched on that. For a university that aspires to be liberal arts, how do we convince our core intellectual community, which is liberal arts, humanities, and social science, to start looking at some of these issues? Ensuring diversity, as we are trying to do, then there are tensions that we want some standard, some coherence, right? So we're bringing a large cohort of students from somewhat unfamiliar background to a university of our kind. How do we intellectually and scholarly codify student-centeredness? How do we, as I shared one example with you, that how can we actually create journals, publications where work with students is recognized with the same prestige as publishing in a research journal? How do we continue to have some niche-oriented space, right? So a lot of faculty, they have worked very hard and they feel very proud of what they have been able to sort of write and research on. How do we create that particular niche? And how do we continue to evolve this learning community? I'm going to close on a couple of closures. This is first. This is my favorite, one of my, let's say, top 5 from Diwan. And the story behind that is that Ghalib took it out of his final edit, right? Because he found a little flaw in this. So this is his famous ghazal, कहते हैं ना देंगे हम दिल अगर पड़ा पाया, दिल कहाँ के गुम कीजिए हमने मुद्दा पाया, इश्क से तबीयत ने जीस्त का मज़ा पाया, दर्द की दवा पाई, दर्द ला दवा पाया. Right? There's 2 matlas in this ghazal. Now this one is phenomenal. है कहाँ तमन्ना का दूसरा कदम यारो, right? So tamanna, you can wish, desire, inspiration. It's a very hard journey, right? So it's saying that how do I take the next step in this inspired journey, right? He says that the desert of possibilities, that's an awesome istara, right? Dasht-e-imkan, desert of possibilities, of potentiality. Its desert is vast, immense, but it's also terrifying, right? So how do I scale this desert of potentiality when all I see but one footprint? There's no path. Got to create it, especially none in our part of the world. But no matter what kind of next steps we take, I go back to the brilliant David Foster Wallace. We have to keep this simple awareness of student-centered in front of us. It is real and essential, so hidden in plain sight all around us, that as administrators, as governors, as donors, as faculty, students, we have to keep reminding ourselves over and over again, this is water. This is water. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Mr. Rizvi. If there are any burning questions, just 1 or 2, if anyone has, we can take them very quickly. Can someone send the mic to?
Rizvi Saab, my name is Saad Shafkat. I am a professor here at AKU, and my daughter goes to Habib. I'm a Habib University parent also. We're thrilled with the experience. She's thrilled with the experience, so I can vouch firsthand the great thing is happening.
Thank you, sir.
Something about universities has always intrigued me. There are 2 fundamental values that we hold dear. One is democracy, the other is meritocracy. So in your opinion, what is a university fundamentally? Is it a democracy, is it a meritocracy, or is it a combination?
Right. I perhaps don't see the tension as perhaps you would. So the question of meritocracy, though, is not a straightforward one, right? Especially, I think that's a continuous and open question for us. that in this divergence, the concept of merit is defined in a particular, narrow, somewhat self-serving way, right? So how do we bring a more diverse, more enriched notion of merit, which is equally celebrated, if not more intellectually celebrated, than what we celebrate as merit in the universities right now? And that in itself is a signal towards achieving this sense of democracy. That's how I would address it.
One more final question in the interest of time.
Hello, this is Sradli. I'm a student of health policy and management here. So it was a very wonderful talk where we have discussed how the universities can be designed in terms of student-centered. So my question is that how the curriculum can be designed to be a student-centered? Because we have noticed that we have some criteria about higher education commission. Higher education commission needs this much of face-to-face student interaction, and the students need less interaction. So how can the curriculum can be designed in a student-centered manner?
So you need to, I think, look, first let me make a disclaimer. By no means this was prescriptive. This is just sharing of, just very initial years of a new experience. I think the way we have tackled it is that we have opened it, at least in these 4 dimensions, which is content, pedagogy, assessment, and community. If you're looking at a course with these 4 different lenses, I think there are lots of niches and possibilities and portals for more student-centeredness to be achieved. And without, stepping on the toes of Higher Education Commission. And one thing which is squarely is in our favor, that those guys are not, let's say, very detail-oriented, right? So they wouldn't understand or wouldn't know. This has been our experience, right? So you have to sort of tick their boxes. That's pretty truism, obvious, and so on. I do want to make this final point to the President and the Provost. So this theme, student-centeredness and university design, has stumbled onto not only a brilliant intellectual idea, but this pivot to student-centeredness is strategically brilliant. I say that this is one way for universities in our part of the world to essentially outflank all the tedious process and get essentially recognized as one of the top institutions. Because great students are not a hegemony of a particular country or a particular nation. Research grants may be, the facilities in the campus, labs, and so on, as Olin and Harvey Mudd have proven. They may have much, proportionally speaking, really modest-sized budgets compared to AKU, but they have outflanked Caltech and Olin and MIT. So this is strategically is a very interesting direction to pursue, apart from all the platitudes and niceties that come with it. All right? Thank you.